Okay, first, let me start by introducing myself. I'm Joe Alani with 101 Domain. I'm going to step off for a second to close my door. And I want to welcome anyone that's visiting to our Google Hangout. I'm talking to Simon Cousins. I first met Simon while he was working for doing some business with the TLD Registry, a registry that's introducing a new Chinese IDN. And every conversation I've had with Simon has been very intriguing. I've always enjoyed talking to him, and I don't think there's anybody I know that knows more about doing business in China.
So, Thank you,
Simon. Simon, welcome.
Thank you.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about your company and about what you do before we actually get started?
Oh, sure, Joe. We for 13 years now, almost 13 years, just over 12 years, we've been a China-focused public relations and communications agency. So we've offered a full suite of marketing and communications consultancy, public relations services, media relations services, government relations services, go-to-market strategies for really diverse clients in the tech sector and pharmaceuticals and banking and a bunch of different sectors in China. So we have a team of people right here in our New York City office where I'm chatting to you today. This is a few of our guys right here hammering away at campaign work. We have a team in Beijing and a team in Hong Kong as well. All up with 15 people around Beijing, Hong Kong and China. And we're talking with you today because we're arguably the most experienced consultancy in the domain business in China. So we've worked with more foreign, that is non-Chinese, like American, European, Australian domain name registries and premium name companies than any other agency in the world. So we know the China domain sector really well.
Right. So one of the questions that we're commonly asked at 101 Domain, because we work with a lot of customers that are interested in doing business overseas and actually protecting their brands around the world, is how to do business in China. And so the question kept coming up. It comes, it always comes into our support staff. People are worried about websites not showing up. They're worried about what domains to use, all kinds of things like that. So I decided to reach out to you a week or so ago, and your answer to me was so intriguing that I couldn't help but to want to share it with other people because I just thought it was such an important topic. But anyway, before we start, I think one of the most important things I would like to ask you is, I read the Wall Street Journal, and I just read today that there's a new Chinese law that poses growing threats to foreign investors, and they're talking about how Amazon and all these companies have invested all this money in China, and now they're having to worry about it. So I wanted to ask you, why does somebody want to do business in China?
Oh, look, I guess I could answer for myself personally. For the last 13 years that I've personally been working in China, I went to China because it really is. It's probably not the most difficult market in the world, Joe, to work in, but it's probably right up there. I'm pretty sure that working in North Korea or Cuba, or maybe like some of the former Soviet Union countries, are going to be equally difficult. But China presents difficulties in terms of difference in language, vast difference in culture, difference in the banking system, difference in almost everything. It's kind of like I've kind of started to think of China over the years as more like a different planet than a different country. So much of everything is different there. So I'm someone who loves a challenge. So I made the decision to go and try to master China more than 13 years ago now, because if China was easy, everyone would be there. So we're one of the few, one of the few, the brave few that takes on the China market and hopefully helps our clients to to succeed there. Well, I'm being modest. We rarely fail to help our clients succeed in China.
In fact, you did wonders, I think, for the TLD registry people.
Thanks. That was for .Chinese Online and .Chinese website, Joe.
Right, exactly. And to me, they were one of the companies that did a really good job of marketing, and especially IDNs. I remember seeing the master class that you guys put together over at the domain conference the beginning of the year. You did a great job, and I took a copy of that, and I learned a lot about China. And I do think that it represents a significant opportunity because let's face it, there's, it's a country that is up and coming. There's so many people there, and there are so many people that don't speak English there, and so the ability to communicate with them in their language, I think, is so important. So that brings us to the topic that I actually wanted to spend some time on, and that is, how do you get started in China? And a little bit, it has, just so you know, what led to this is people asked about the CN domain name. One of the questions that I wanted to ask you is if somebody uses a CN domain name, or if they host their website with a host here or in China, what is the best way to do it? Well, how can they be visible in China?
Sure. Look, it's really important, obviously, and this is an issue not just for domain name investors, Joe, but also for brands and businesses, right? And even just like independent bloggers. You want your website to be visible inside of China. I think everyone watching, the Hangout today is aware of the Great Firewall of China. Very few people understand really with a great level of detail how exactly it operates. But look, some countries of the world have made the decision at the government level to filter or to censor what comes in over the internet. My own country, Australia, has had some policies, most of which have been wrong-headed, to filter parts of the internet coming in. But China has arguably the world's most sophisticated and broad system of internet filtering. And this system of internet filtering, it's not just to keep the bad stuff out, not just to keep the porn, if you want to call that bad stuff, or definitely the phishing out, but also to help the Chinese government to execute its plan of staged development, staged opening up and reform. So a lot of people that are hosting really innocuous websites, like websites that might be about collecting Wedgwood china, might find their site being carefully scrutinized by the automated scripts inside of the Great Firewall because it's a blog about Wedgwood china, that is plates made in Great Britain, because the word China is in there. So, there's a lot of kind of gotchas, right? I know that a lot of people, that offer health and well-being websites, often get caught by porn filters. So, there's a lot of keywords that you could be publishing on your website that could trigger some of the filters in the Great Firewall. And a really common thing that triggers the filters also, even if the language is squeaky clean. Things like running your Twitter widget or your Facebook widget on the homepage of a website will usually lead to the website either being blocked or being really badly slowed down to the point where it's unusable. Because, as most people know, it's not possible to see Twitter or Facebook or many other social networking services from the West inside of China. So just adding those widgets will cause you difficulty. Right. For many years, one of the biggest problems or biggest causes of having your website blocked in China is that you're on a shared server. So maybe you've got hosting via a big, international hosting company. You're buying a $20 a month or $50 a month or $100 a month, shared hosting service, and your IP address is either shared amongst multiple websites or it's in a block of Class C IP addresses that's already been blocked. So there might be one website on that server of, 1,000 websites that the Chinese government doesn't like or doesn't want to come into the country. So the Great Firewall sometimes, will just block every website within that block of IP. So there's all sorts of really innocent reasons for getting blocked inside of China. But there are some simple tricks, for mitigating those problems.
So, yeah, you told me a story about Auntie Agnes's bakery, I believe, and something about free pie.
Oh yeah, well look, this has recently come out for Google watchers. Most Google watchers would have seen over the last few weeks there was a quote-unquote free Tibet pie offered in one of the Google kitchens quite some years ago. So maybe if your Auntie Edna, who's got a nice baking blog or a baking website, if she just linked to this story about Google's free Tibet pie, which by the way was very contentious inside of Google. Many people inside of Google, said we should support this pie and all eat it, and others said this is terrible. We shouldn't be using such political terms in our, in our foods. This story actually created the longest running thread inside of the Google, the internal Google instant messaging system in the history of Google. So if Auntie Agnes just thought, oh, here's an interesting story about baking, all she has to do is just link to a tweet about that, and that might cause her baking website to be blocked inside of China. So, it's not that you want to be practicing self-censorship, it's just that you want to really, if you want your product or service to be visible to your marketplace, then, within any marketing strategy, you create a strategy in which it's going to be the most accessible possible. If you want to be seen by, 15 million people a day, then you buy a billboard in Times Square. You implement a marketing plan that will, cause your message to be seen by, your target market. And if you want your website to be seen by China, then, you have to make sure your website's in a fit state to be seen inside of China.
Right. Just so for those that have joined the Hangout late, I apologize for the trouble we had in the beginning. We had to actually restart the whole thing with a new link. Just somehow I blocked out my guest here, so apologize for that. By the way, I've also opened up the chat, and I posted in a little link to the article that talked about what happened with the free Tibetan pie. One of the other things that Simon talked to me about that I thought was interesting, another way to, I guess, get your website blocked or something is, hurting the feelings of the Chinese people. Can you tell me a little bit about that, Simon?
Oh, wow, this is a conversation all about how to get blocked. Sure, Joe. The euphemism, the Chinese language is a really ancient and beautiful language. It predates English by like 3,000 years. So with any language that's very ancient, it's had a lot of time for poets and for wordsmiths to learn how to use the language really beautifully. So the Chinese language has really evolved to being a language in which a lot of euphemism is used. There's one particular euphemism that's been common in China's media over the years. As you say, it's hurting the feelings of the Chinese people. It basically means that it's somebody who's done something that is forbidden in China or is discussing a topic which is not permitted in China. Yeah.
So it's pretty much to their discretion, I guess you would say.
As it is to many governments around the world. Arguably China does have more rules than many other governments, but there's stuff that we can't discuss here in the United States also. It's just that here we don't categorize that information as hurting the feelings of the American people.
Right, exactly. And of course some of that is lost in translation, I guess, too.
Exactly, yeah.
Now, this is, I think in our discussion, one of the most important things you revealed to me was the idea of an internet content license. Can you share with people what that is and how they would go about getting that?
Okay, so the law of China, as far as hosting websites, is very clear. It's clear and on the record. There are some parts which are still ambiguous, but the broad strokes of the Chinese law around hosting websites are very clear and have been for quite some years. In China, there is a special license called the ICP. It stands for Internet Content Provider. It basically is a license that attaches one real person, not a company, but one person to a website. Now, every website which is hosted inside the borders of the People's Republic of China, so this doesn't include Hong Kong, doesn't include Macau, doesn't include Taiwan, doesn't include Singapore, doesn't include California, but a website which is physically hosted on a server inside the borders of the People's Republic of China must by law have an ICP license. So this means that every website needs to have a person connected to it. So the ICP license is fairly straightforward to get for Chinese citizens because Chinese citizens can prove their identity to the part of the Chinese government that issues these licenses, the so-called MIIT, or the Ministry of Industry and Information Technology. Now, the problem is that foreigners like you and me, we don't have a Chinese ID card, so it's kind of really tricky for us to prove our identity to the Chinese government. Now, if you're someone who owns a business inside of China, as my partners and I do, then we are obviously known and we have a certain approved identity inside of China. So it is possible for foreigners that have credentials inside of China to get ICP addresses. But typically ICP addresses in 99.999% of cases are issued to a Chinese national with a Chinese ID card. Now that ICP license, the license number, is on the public record. So you'll see in the footer of every approved Chinese website, which is basically every website hosted in China, you'll see a little red and gold shield icon. Tiny little icon, only like, I don't know, 10 pixels, 12 pixels high. And if you click that, it'll link through to the actual certificate of authenticity, the certificate of approval, that this physical person, this real person, is responsible for the content on this website. So if, at some point the website publishes something which hurts the feelings of the Chinese people, the authorities know who to go and talk to. So
is that when you say to talk to, you're talking about inviting them to tea?
Joe, you've become such a China expert. Yes, you probably don't want to be invited to drink tea with the police. Although I've known many very nice, very friendly neighborhood policemen in my 10+ years of living in China, but you probably don't want to specifically be invited to drink tea. It's a gentle way of saying you'll be interrogated by the police or questioned by the police. Yeah. The benefit of having an ICP on your website, obviously, is that your website is being hosted inside the PRC, the People's Republic of China, and therefore it's going to be really fast, because it's on the Chinese internet. There's no problem with hosting your website outside of China. There's nothing in the Chinese law that says websites hosted outside of China will always be blocked. That's not the case. So you can certainly host your website outside of China, but obviously a site outside of China can't have an ICP address, and that does give the authorities a cause for restricting access to your website if it's in a sensitive topic.
Is there a place where somebody can get an ICP that is in English?
Oh, gee, no, I don't think so. This is look, the Chinese people speak Chinese, right? The government uses Chinese, so I don't think you can go to the Federal Trade Commission in Washington and get an extract of your company records in German, or in Icelandic or in Chinese. The government speaks English here.
So is this something that's expensive to do?
No, it's nominal. It's a nominal cost.
Okay.
But
they're
typically
going to need some guidance, I would say.
Sorry, Joe, ask again.
They're going to need some guidance to be able to get this, or is it something that a typical American?
Yeah, No. The website in which you apply for your ICP, it's all in Chinese. It's complicated.
Okay. So you're going to need someone who speaks Chinese to be able to get through that process, I suppose.
And you need a Chinese ID card also, which means you'd be born in the People's Republic of China when your mother and father are both Chinese citizens.
So how would an American person be able to get one?
American persons typically don't get them. For foreign companies which do apply for ICPs, there's typically the person who's the chief representative or a person who's in a position of authority within the Chinese company, that is the Chinese subsidiary company of the foreign company, yeah? Okay. So that person is known as the chief representative, sometimes the legal person. It's kind of like company secretary. It's usually the legal person of the Chinese subsidiary of the foreign company that can make the application for.
So you're going to need to actually have a sort of a company set up in China to do this, I guess.
Yeah. In an overwhelming majority of cases, the MIAT does reserve the right to make exceptions, as the American president reserves the right to make exceptions also, Yeah. So yeah, the government can make exceptions, but a good stopgap to hosting a site that you want to be not only visible to China but also fast in China is to host in Hong Kong. It's not a panacea for all of the challenges, but Hong Kong's literally there's a border. On one side of the border is Shenzhen, and and China's mainland, and on the other side it's Hong Kong. So you know, all of the water that's consumed in Hong Kong, for example, comes across the border from, you know, from Guangdong province.
Right.
So it's really just a chain link fence, you know, that separates the two countries. Sorry, I didn't say two countries. The one country, two systems. So hosting in Hong Kong means that the internet infrastructure is pretty fast for Chinese users.
Okay. One of the other questions.
And you know what? I mean, it's pretty easy. There's all sorts of tools you can use, and we probably don't need to go through them now. I mean, anyone who's in the hosting business is going to be capable of telnetting into, you know, a host in China and test connectivity. And there's web tools also that let you test connectivity to see whether your website's available, you know, within China. And remember also that the Great Firewall, the so-called Great Firewall, it doesn't actually have an official name. But the Great Firewall can also operates inside of China. So it is possible for like news in one province to be blocked off from the rest of the country, with the purpose of helping the government to ensure that the whole country doesn't get panicked, for example. You know, if one particular, you know, emergency should happen.
Right.
So yeah, your site may be visible in Beijing, but not visible in Shanghai. Okay. So, you know, there are tools you can use to test.
One thing that you mentioned in our discussion earlier was if somebody wants to sell products in China, what are the best ways to go about that?
So like physical products?
Services or products?
Sure. Let's talk about physical products, because services is a whole other category, has a whole other set of cultural baggage that you need to take into consideration. Selling physical stuff in China, you really must offer Alipay as a payments gateway option. There's no way around this. Alipay, which is the Alibaba platform for payments clearing. Alipay is so dominant in the Chinese marketplace that no other player comes even close. PayPal was almost killed in China, and maybe coming back, but PayPal helicoptered the American system or the Western system of payments into China unmodified and gained single-digit uptake. Alipay, on the other hand, is completely ubiquitous. It's not the only payments gateway, but and there are 2 or 3 other strong contenders, but not offering Alipay is like not offering Visa card payment options, you know, to Americans, you know. Alipay is not just a payments gateway. Alipay, because it's an Alibaba product and was invented for China, it incorporates some really critically important cultural characteristics in that payments gateway. Firstly, it provides escrow for every transaction. So in China, people don't trust people that they don't know. Right. It's very uncommon. It's just culturally stupid. It's culturally unthinkable to automatically trust people that aren't your family or aren't well known to you. You know, like it's just a cultural difference. You know, for Americans, we're raised to. Well, sorry, I'm Australian, but you know, I spend a lot of time in the US. You know, it's thought to be, you know, the appropriate thing to do, to trust strangers, because we know we always have the police and the court system to go to, you know, in case we're cheated. Where in China, you know, because China's still a developing country in many ways, and the reform and opening up process is only since the 1980s, you know, the court system is just still catching up with, you know, Western standards of ubiquity.
Trust anybody.
Yeah, so if I'm buying some widget from some guy over the internet in China, I'm not going to assume that it's going to be what I expect it to be. So every transaction, everything I buy through Alipay has escrow baked in. You know, you can't do an Alipay transaction without escrow. So I'm protected as a buyer. I'm protected.
Now I have another question.
Sure, go. On escrow, go ahead. There's one other really important characteristic of Alipay that I'd like to cover off also, since it's sort of 2 sides of the same coin, Joe. The other characteristic is that because China is still developing and opening up, there is no national credit reference system. There's no way of doing a credit check on somebody. China doesn't really have a credit card system. Like, people don't borrow money, you know, much like the French. I understand the German people, they don't like credit cards. They don't like borrowing money. They like to pay with debit. They like to have money in the bank, like real money. China is very much like that. So there being no national credit reference system, Alipay has a system of star ratings. So every transaction requires a star rating to be given to both the vendor and the buyer. So the Alipay star rating system has become the national de facto credit rating system.
Oh.
So there's a great incentive for buyers and sellers to strive to get good star ratings, because if you've got a bad star rating on the Alibaba platforms within Alipay, you're dead. You can't sell anything, and you actually can't buy anything either. So yeah, you see there's these two really interesting cultural characteristics that perfectly fit the way that Chinese consumers spend their money today, buy and sell today, and in many ways have done so for thousands of years.
So how does somebody...
Sorry, Joe, I cut you off.
No, my question was, how does somebody actually use this system? I'm looking at Alipay.com and it's all in Chinese to me.
Yeah, so as a vendor, as a Western vendor, you can get an Alipay account. Like many things in China, it's a little bit complicated. Complicated for several reasons. Complicated because this is a country of 1.4 billion people, just incredibly huge country, unimaginably huge. Also, the Chinese currency, the Chinese yuan, Y-U-A-N, or the International Banking Code, or CNY, sometimes written as RMB, which is an abbreviation of renminbi, which literally means the people's money. So RMB would be like, you might say dollars, US dollars, and bucks. You'd say Chinese yuan and renminbi. So the renminbi, the RMB, is not a transferable currency. So, you can't go to the Chase Manhattan Bank and open an account and start putting Chinese currency into it. You can do that with euros. You can do it with, Australian dollars and US dollars and Japanese yen. But you can't bank in Chinese currency unless you're physically in China. There are, like many things in China, exceptions. There is a free trade agreement, for example, over the border between China and Hong Kong that enables RMB banking to be done in Hong Kong. But in general terms, an American vendor of products, let's say you're selling T-shirts, you can't just start doing your business in Chinese currency. So you see, you've potentially, if you're shipping your T-shirts into a free trade zone, of which, if I recall correctly, there are 5 in China at the moment. That is like bonded warehouses that are tax-free. So let's say you're keeping your T-shirts in a bonded warehouse in China, and you're all set up. You've got your store on Taobao or Tmall, and you're ready to start selling your cool T-shirts. You've then got Chinese people sending you Chinese money, and you can't convert that into US dollars, unless you go complicated steps, which Alipay will help you to do.
Oh, okay.
So
Alipay can help
the
you.
application for an Alipay, yeah, exactly. But what you need to pay is you typically, and it's a case-by-case basis, but you'll apply for an account with Alipay as a foreign vendor, and you'll need to have quite a high deposit in Alipay. I recall the last time we successfully got an Alipay account for a client. It was a big fashion label. I think not so big. It was like a mid-range, but a hip, upcoming fashion label. And I think Alipay required a monthly balance of about $50,000 to be sitting in the account. And that preserves, it ensures that, if any weird currency transaction things are done contrary to the law, then, there's a deposit.
They're covering themselves as well.
Exactly.
Right. Okay. I think we've covered most of the things here. I've opened up a chat window, and in the chat window I've posted a number of the links of I guess one of the things that I'd like to add to this is the importance of talking. If it's, it's very evident as I talk to Simon and I look at these various websites that it's difficult for me as an American to understand Chinese websites. Well, I imagine there are, hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of Chinese people that are finding it very difficult to understand the American websites and the English websites.
Yeah.
So, there's tools like IDNs, and I know that you said earlier that, the domain name isn't all that important. What's more important is getting this ICP and your own IP address.
Yeah, I think we were talking. I think we were talking about
things.
whether a .cn domain is some magic bullet that will help to stave off, any problems with getting blocked? I think the answer to that was no. It really doesn't matter. I mean, simply putting your website under a .cn doesn't magically make it available to Chinese consumers. And it also doesn't necessarily make your website any more attractive to Chinese consumers. No diss on .cns, but they're kind of, a little bit old, a little bit boring. No diss intended, but
the way I look
there's no magic. There's no magic in any particular domain name to get
we
approval
sell
inside of China.
we sell a lot of .cn domain names because people want them to protect their brand. But
right.
Yeah, they're with new TLDs and the IDNs and the choices that are out there now. I had a conversation with the people from the Chinese trademark. I think you know them. Alex was the guy that I spoke to over there today.
Yeah, that's pronounced .shang biao. Yeah, well, it's trademark in Chinese.
Right. So they won't sell a domain to anybody that doesn't have a trademark. So it's
right.
kind of an interesting model that they have. And but most importantly, they're IDNs and they're speaking Chinese. So the domain
right.
is in Chinese, and obviously you'll probably need somebody to help you to be able to communicate in the Chinese language if you want to do business.
Yeah, and you know what? There's a step, for companies, for brands and businesses. There's a step even before just translating your website into Chinese or your marketing collateral into Chinese. Your brand itself needs to be comprehensible to Chinese. Like, I don't know. For example, I just saw some artwork come through today on a Chinese project that we've been asked to assist on. Another studio has designed things like fortune cookies to show how Chinese they are, and we've been asked to critique some of the designs. Fortune cookies were invented in America, and they were taken from a Japanese snack. And there's a great TED talk on the TED website with a wonderful American-born Chinese chef who took fortune cookies and American Chinese food back to Beijing.
Wow.
And stood in the street and handed American Chinese food out, and Chinese people have never seen a fortune cookie. They have no idea what these things are. So yeah, so to presume that your company name or your website name or your brand makes sense to China just because you're such a genius, Australian or American or German, that's just the height of cultural imperialism. It's saying, I'm a white dude or I'm a European dude, therefore I know best. 1.4 Chinese consumers have a 5,000-year-old history, and they know what they like. There are also, because of the very old history, there are such strong cultural triggers around colors, around images, around symbols, even around the way that you put words together. And because of the Chinese system of government is quite strict, there are words that you may not legally use in China. For example, even the acronym, TLD, top level domain, which most people in the domain business know, it's against Chinese law to put the word or the acronym TLD into your company or your brand name.
What does it mean?
Top level domain, right?
But I mean Chinese.
The Mandarin Chinese word for domain is yuming. It's not legal to put that into a company name. Because everything around the internet technology is regulated, and everything around banking is regulated, and so on. So the step before translating your website is to make sure that the way, ensuring that your brand identity, that is the encapsulation of what your brand or your business stands for, making sure that works in what you think it communicates, because oftentimes it'll communicate something quite different, and it'll be confusing to Chinese consumers or to Chinese partners. So yeah, sure, translation. You say translation's important because 1.4 billion Chinese people want to read Chinese, just like 600 million American people want to read English or Spanish. The symbols of your business also need to be comprehensible and persuasive to Chinese consumers and to Chinese markets. And that's one of the fundamental services that we bring to every one of our clients to ensure, first of all, that the brand, the business, the positioning of the brand and the business is accurate. And then, you've often got products or services that come from the West that, are kind of blah or ho-hum in the West, but can be, positioned really well in China. I love, when I first went to China 13 years ago, I lived in Beijing more than 10 years. I remember when I first arrived there 13 years ago, it was very well known all over China that Pizza Hut was the world's finest Italian restaurant. You know, because Pizza Hut had positioned itself, you know, as literally that, as the world's finest Italian restaurant.
Oh, that's funny.
And it's expensive, you know. It's expensive to go to Pizza Hut in China for that reason. PBR, many people on the east coast of the US would know PBR, Pabst Blue Ribbon, which is kind of one of the most working man. It's literally the cheapest beer you can buy in, you know, in New York and the tri-state area. It's been positioned in China as the champagne of beers. It is literally the most expensive beer you can purchase from any country, any brand,
a lot of business.
because it's been positioned differently. You know, Buick, and I lived in China much longer than I've spent time in the US. You know, in China, Buick has been positioned as one of the world's finest luxury marks, you know, of motor car. And I only found out a few years ago when my family and I moved up to New York, that Buick is like your grandfather's car, you know, like the most boring choice you could make. So, I mean, no offense, Buick owners or lovers, but yeah, so that whole process of positioning is not just about getting your brand accurately positioned, but figuring out what different markets exist in China and how you can position your product or your service in a way that can expose it to sales opportunities in markets in China and the Chinese-speaking world that you hadn't even dreamt of.
Yeah. Okay, well, this has really been great. We've kind of come to our time limit, Simon. I want to thank you for taking the time to share these ideas with us. And again, I want to apologize to anybody that tried to sign in and had trouble. We are going to post this on YouTube. And Simon Works is the founder, I believe, of Allegravita. Allegravita. That's a great name, by the way. It stands for the fast life or something like that. It's it's an exciting life, right?
Yeah, it means a happy life.
Very
Basically,
cool.
a happy life in Latin. Yeah, which is another great and ancient language.
Do appreciate you coming on, Simon. And if anybody has any questions, you can go to allegravita.com or come to 101domain.com if you have any questions about domain names. And we sure appreciate you guys joining us.
Right on, Joe.
Bye now.